You know, the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once famously said that all of Western philosophy is merely a series of footnotes to Plato. Now, that is a huge claim. But in this explainer, we're going to see exactly why he said it. We're diving deep into the life and the enduring legacy of the man who, quite literally, shaped how we think today. It's a massive, weighty topic for sure, but we're going to approach it by looking at the fascinating intersection between a real historical giant and the revolutionary ideas that completely outlasted him. So get ready for an illuminating look at one of history's greatest minds. But before we can even begin to understand his enduring impact on the world, we have to anchor him as a real, breathing, historical figure. We so often hear a name like Plato and we immediately jump to abstract philosophy, grand ideas, and centuries of intellectual tradition. But the myth was born from a mortal man. In fact, and a lot of people don't know this, Plato was likely just a wrestling nickname meaning broad. Yeah, it referred to his broad shoulders. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a ring name. His actual given name was Aristocles. Every single monumental idea we're going to discuss started in the mind of this very real mortal guy who lived through a specific sequence of everyday events. Act 1. The life. Okay, let's dive right into this and explain the actual timeline of the man himself. Picture this. It's around 428 BCE, and young Aristocles is born into a world in absolute turmoil. He comes from an aristocratic Athenian family, but he arrives right in the middle of the Peloponnesian War. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some historical backdrop for him. It was a defining everyday reality. He literally watched his powerful, sophisticated city-state of Athens fall to Sparta. So by understanding these origins, we see Plato not just as a name etched in marble somewhere, but as a young man surrounded by political chaos, desperately looking for stability and truth in a totally crumbling world. If we look at the timeline of his earthly existence, we can really break his life down into three major distinct phases. In his early years, absolutely the most pivotal event was meeting his mentor, Socrates. Socrates was this brilliant, eccentric thinker who relentlessly questioned literally everything. Then, moving into his midlife, Plato took a massive leap by founding the Academy, which is widely considered the very first institution of higher learning in the Western world. And finally, in his later years, he dedicated himself to writing his famous philosophical dialogues, essentially ensuring that his concepts would outlive him. To truly grasp his trajectory, though, we have to look at one specific, traumatic event that changed everything. Initially, Plato had serious political ambitions. He was born into the ruling class, so it was expected. But then, in 399 BCE, everything shattered. His beloved mentor, Socrates, was put on trial and executed by the Athenian democracy. Just imagine how profoundly traumatic that would be. It led Plato to a complete and total disillusionment with politics as it existed. He pivoted entirely away from it, coming to the conclusion that society would never actually be just until philosophers became kings or kings became philosophers. And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental transition we need to make in our understanding of him. On one hand, we had the finite mortal life of Plato, which wrapped up around 348 BCE. But directly contrasted with that physical end is his absolutely infinite legacy. Because he made the choice to write down his philosophies, and specifically in that engaging, dramatic dialogue format, his ideas completely escaped the strict boundaries of his physical lifespan. It's the exact moment a mortal man transitions into an immortal idea. Act 2. The legacy. All right, let's shift gears now and move from the man himself to the massive historical footprint he left behind. When we talk about Plato's legacy, we absolutely have to start with his most profound intellectual leap, the theory of forms. This is a radical concept. It's the belief that the physical world we experience every single day, what we can touch and see, is not actually the true reality. Instead, he argued there is a higher, timeless, and unchangeable realm of forms or ideas. So the trees, the chairs, even abstract concepts like justice that we see here on Earth, they're just imperfect, temporary shadows of these absolute truths. We're no longer just measuring a mortal life here. We are exploring a framework that completely redefined human consciousness. So let's break down the specific components of this massive legacy. First off, he single-handedly preserved Socratic thought. Because Socrates himself never wrote anything down, we only know his brilliant method of questioning because Plato so meticulously recorded it for us. Second, by establishing the Academy, he laid out the foundational blueprint for the entire modern university system. And finally, his monumental written works laid the groundwork for Western political science, for ethics, and the even heavily influenced later Christian theology. His influence is literally everywhere you look. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly it maps out that exact transition from earthly reality to historical myth. We can directly contrast the finite actions of his life with the infinite ideas they spawned. For instance, he physically purchased a plot of land in the Grove of Academus, right? A very finite, mundane action. But the result? The enduring idea of the university. He physically sat down and wrote out arguments. The result? The timeless Socratic method. He critiqued his local Athenian democracy, and boom, it birthed political science as we know it today. It's just wild to think about.
Section 3. Plato's impact today. Let's bring all of this directly into our modern world.
So the crucial point here is that understanding the man explains the legacy, and that legacy is incredibly relevant to us right now. Think about Plato's most famous concept of all, the allegory of the cave. He described prisoners chained in a dark cave watching shadows cast on a wall and mistakenly believing those shadows were reality. Well, today, we don't really have literal caves, but we absolutely have digital ones. This ancient allegory perfectly explains our modern struggles with media literacy, social media echo chambers, and even the very concept of virtual reality. It's people staring at glowing screens, mistaking highly curated shadows for the absolute truth. The finite truly does create the infinite.
Which brings us to our final parting question for this explainer. How does Plato's legacy continue to shape your world today? The mortal man we discussed passed away over 2 millennia ago, but his infinite impact is still rippling through our modern institutions right this second. Every single time you enter a university, engage in a political debate, use mathematics, or question whether the information you are consuming is actually true or just a shadow on the wall, you are walking right in Plato's footsteps. I highly encourage you to look closely around you this week for the echoes of this legacy in your own daily life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the world around you.